Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your city in lockdown. Again. News headlines scream about a mysterious virus spreading like wildfire. But this time, it's not COVID. This time, it's something potentially far more deadly. A virus that can leave you scarred for life. A pathogen with a death rate 5 times higher than COVID. A disease that's been silently evolving for decades, waiting for its moment to explode onto the world stage. This isn't science fiction. This is Mpox, and it could be the next global pandemic. In the next few minutes, you'll discover why health experts are losing sleep over this emerging threat. You'll learn how this virus, once confined to remote African jungles, is now knocking on our doors. And most importantly, you'll find out if you're at risk and what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones. Buckle up, because the story you're about to hear might just change the way you think about global health forever. Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, is a virus that belongs to the same family as smallpox, the orthopox virus family. Its story begins in 1958 when it was first discovered in a colony of monkeys kept for research. But it wasn't until 1970 that the first human case was documented in the Democratic Republic of Congo. For decades, Mpox remained mostly under the radar, causing sporadic outbreaks in Central and West Africa. It was considered a rare and contained threat, affecting only those in close contact with infected animals or people in remote regions. But in recent years, something has changed. Mpox has started to spread beyond its traditional boundaries, reaching countries that had never seen a single case before. So, what exactly happens if you catch Mpox? It starts with flu-like symptoms: fever, chills, muscle aches, and fatigue. You might think it's just a bad cold or the flu, but then the real telltale sign appears: a rash. The rash often starts on the face and then spreads to other parts of the body, including the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. It begins as flat red spots that turn into raised bumps, then fluid-filled blisters, before eventually crusting over. It's a painful, disfiguring process that can leave lasting scars. But that's just the start. Mpox can lead to serious complications, especially in people with weakened immune systems, children, and pregnant women. These complications can include pneumonia, sepsis, and encephalitis, an inflammation of the brain that can cause permanent neurological damage or even death. The mortality rate for Mpox varies depending on the strain, but it can be as high as 10%, particularly in areas with limited access to healthcare. Compare that to COVID-19, with its mortality rate of around 0.5% to 2%, and you start to understand why Mpox is a virus we can't afford to ignore. So how does Mpox spread? The virus is primarily transmitted from animals to humans, usually through contact with infected animals like rodents and primates, or by handling bushmeat. Once it reaches humans, it can spread from person to person. Human-to-human transmission occurs through close contact with an infected person's bodily fluids, respiratory droplets, or skin lesions. This means that activities like caring for someone with Mpox, sharing bedding or clothing, or even being in close proximity for extended periods can put you at risk. What makes Mpox particularly tricky is its potential for airborne transmission. While it's not as easily spread through the air as viruses like COVID-19, there's evidence that prolonged face-to-face contact can result in transmission via respiratory droplets. This could lead to rapid spread in crowded, poorly ventilated spaces, especially in areas with dense populations. But the absolute nightmare scenario is if the virus mutates, becoming more transmissible or resistant to existing treatments. Viruses like Mpox, with their ability to spread through multiple routes and cause severe disease, are precisely the kind of pathogens that can slip through the cracks of our global defenses. While the world remains COVID-weary and many are deeply suspicious about how it all unfolded, the thought of another pandemic is something few are willing to face. However, the potential for a widespread outbreak is real and growing by the day. Now, when we think about pandemics, our minds naturally go to COVID-19, the virus that recently brought the world to its knees. Like COVID-19, Mpox has the potential to spread quickly, especially in a world where global travel is the norm. A virus once confined to remote regions of Africa is now showing up in countries worldwide, just as COVID-19 did in its early days.
Both viruses can also cause severe illness and death, particularly among vulnerable populations. But here's where Mpox differs and where the danger lies. Unlike COVID-19, which primarily spreads through respiratory droplets, Mpox can spread through multiple routes. direct contact with bodily fluids, contaminated objects, and potentially through prolonged close contact. This multifaceted transmission makes Mpox harder to contain, especially when people live in close quarters or have limited access to hygiene and medical facilities. One of the most terrifying aspects of any virus is its ability to mutate. We saw this with COVID-19, how variants like Delta and Omicron changed the course of the pandemic, making the virus more transmissible and in some cases more deadly. Mpox is no different. Currently, Mpox is relatively stable with two main strains, the West African strain and the Central African strain, also known as the Congo Basin strain. The West African strain is less deadly, with a mortality rate of around 1%, while the Congo Basin strain can be much more severe, with a mortality rate of up to 10%. But what if these strains were to mutate? What if a new variant emerged that combines the high transmissibility of the West African strain with the lethality of the Congo Basin strain? Or what if Mpox developed resistance to existing vaccines and treatments? These are not just hypothetical scenarios, they are real possibilities that could have devastating consequences. The longer Mpox spreads unchecked, the more opportunities it has to mutate. Once a virus begins to change, it becomes increasingly difficult to predict and control. So, what's being done to prevent Mpox from becoming the next pandemic? One of the first lines of defense has been heightened surveillance. Countries are increasingly monitoring for Mpox cases, especially in areas where the virus has never been seen before. This includes tracking new cases, conducting contact tracing, and isolating infected individuals to prevent further spread. Laboratories worldwide are also ramping up their capacity to test for Mpox, which is crucial for early detection and containment. International organizations like the World Health Organization are coordinating with governments to share information, resources, and best practices for managing Mpox outbreaks. Regarding vaccination and treatment, we're in a slightly better position than we were at the start of COVID-19, but significant challenges remain. The smallpox vaccine, which has been around for decades, offers some protection against Mpox. In fact, people who have been vaccinated against smallpox are believed to have around 85% protection against it. However, routine smallpox vaccination was stopped in most countries after the disease was declared eradicated in 1980, which means that younger generations are largely unprotected. Some countries have begun to reintroduce smallpox vaccination for healthcare workers and people who are at high risk of exposure to Mpox.
Research is ongoing to develop more effective treatments and possibly even Mpox-specific vaccines. But as with any emerging infectious disease, it's a race against time. The longer it takes to develop and distribute these interventions, the greater the risk that Mpox could spread uncontrollably. So, could Mpox actually become the next pandemic? The short answer is, yes, it could. The potential is certainly there. Mpox has already demonstrated its ability to cross borders, spread within communities, and evade detection until it's too late. The virus's ability to spread through various methods makes it particularly dangerous in densely populated areas. However, whether Mpox will reach pandemic scale depends on several factors. One key point is the speed and effectiveness of the global response. If public health systems can identify and contain outbreaks quickly, ramp up vaccination efforts, and communicate effectively with the public, there's a good chance we can prevent Mpox from spiraling out of control. But if these measures fail, or if the virus mutates in a way that makes it more transmissible or deadly, the pandemic risk increases significantly. In the wake of COVID-19, many people are understandably wary of new health threats. There's a sense of fatigue, a desire to move on and return to normal life. This could lead to a dangerous complacency where people dismiss the threat of Mpox as just another virus and fail to take the necessary precautions. Then there's the tricky topic of vaccinations. How many people around the world would trust a new vaccination that suddenly appears? You can be certain the misinformation monster would soon go into overdrive, and we'd be faced with a torrent of bizarre claims about Mpox, which will only exacerbate the situation. On the other hand, the memory of COVID-19 could work in our favor. Many saw firsthand how quickly a virus can spread and how devastating the consequences can be. If they recognize the signs early and are willing to take action, whether by getting vaccinated, following public health guidelines, or supporting government measures, we might be able to prevent Mpox from reaching pandemic status. We're at a crossroads. We can take the lessons learned from past pandemics and act swiftly to contain this virus, or we risk watching history repeat itself in a much darker, deadlier form. Mpox is now more than just a distant threat. This is a virus with the potential to disrupt our world in ways we can't afford to ignore. As we conclude our exploration of Mpox and its pandemic potential, it's crucial to remember that knowledge is power. By understanding the threat, staying informed, and supporting global health initiatives, we can all play a part in preventing the next pandemic. The story of Mpox is still being written, and we all have a role in determining its ending. Will it be a cautionary tale of a threat averted, or the prologue to another global crisis? The choice in many ways is ours.